When I was a small child, Digimon World was great for the imagination. I still loved seeing what kind of Digimon I would get, but also dreaded getting Numemon or Sukamon. I also loved playing shopkeeper as a kid. As an adult though, Weedmon, get out of my store! The world is huge, and if you're skilled enough, you really felt like you could visit anywhere, even if you did not know how you were going to get from A to B. In today's gaming landscape, open-world design has become almost the default. Any major AAA release is likely to promise players the freedom to explore its world however they choose. Even genres that were once known for strictly linear progression, such as platformers, have increasingly embraced larger maps and more player freedom. While games have always offered players a certain degree of choice, the open-world formula we recognize today didn't truly enter the mainstream until Grand Theft Auto 3 in 2001. The early GTA titles were level-based affairs, but in GTA 3 the game's facsimile of NYC, Liberty City, gave players a huge sandbox to explore at their own pace, tackling story missions whenever they felt like it, rather than moving from level to level in a predetermined order. The success of GTA 3 and its sequels helped establish the open-world game as one of the industry's defining genres. But building a world that feels genuinely worth exploring is easier said than done. A map can be enormous and still feel empty. It can be packed with content and still feel artificial. The best sandbox games strike a difficult balance between freedom, discovery, and purpose. And while GTA 3 is often treated as the beginning of the modern open-world boom, it certainly wasn't the first game to experiment with that style of design. Developers throughout the 1990s were already exploring the idea of large, free-form worlds that encouraged players to forge their own paths. One of the most surprising examples came from an unlikely place: one of the very first Digimon video games, released for the PlayStation in 1999. Because when people talk about Digimon World today, they rarely talk about the story. They rarely talk about the final boss. Instead, they tell stories about the Digimon they raised, the places they discovered, the secrets they stumbled into, and the mistakes they made. And almost everyone seems to have a different story. Early on, I kept getting Tyrannomon instead of Greymon, and he eats all your meat. When I finally got my first good ultimate, Andromon, I made a lot of progress. Digimon World serves as a console adaptation of the original Digital Monster Virtual Pets, blended with an open-world adventure game. The player is tasked with restoring File Island, whose Digimon inhabitants have gradually gone feral for reasons unknown. As you solve each Digimon's problems and convince them to return home, they move into File City, transforming the island's tiny settlement into a bustling hub full of new shops, services, and conveniences. After a brief introduction, the game drops you into the digital world with either an Agumon or a Gabumon, and from there gives you an unusual amount of freedom. There are story objectives certainly, but Digimon World is surprisingly unconcerned with telling you where to go or what to do next. Instead, the game revolves around a simple loop: raise your Digimon, explore the island, recruit new citizens, and use the resources they provide to raise even stronger Digimon. That might sound straightforward, but the twist is that your Digimon is less of a party member and more of an actual pet. Digimon World takes the basic ideas behind the original Virtual Pets and expands them into a full-fledged console game framework. Your partner still needs to eat, sleep, and stay healthy. It still gets sick, it still grows hungry. The difference is that you're now managing all of those needs while exploring a large world full of battles, secrets, and story events. The game even reworks some of the stranger mechanics from the Virtual Pets. Rather than simply cleaning up after your Digimon, for example, the goal is to get them to a toilet before disaster strikes. Every major area has a restroom somewhere nearby, and carrying portable toilets quickly becomes as important as carrying healing items. I personally like to imagine these things as hospital bedpans rattling around in the protagonist's elementary school book bag, because that idea is very funny to me for some reason. Digimon World also introduces systems like fatigue, happiness, and discipline, all of which influence your Digimon's behavior and development. Push them too hard and they'll become depressed and even ill. Spoil them too much and they may begin ignoring commands or even refusing items. Raise them well and they'll live longer, perform better, and ultimately evolve into stronger forms. And that's really the core idea behind Digimon World. Unlike most monster raising games, your relationship with your partner isn't just cosmetic. The way you care for your Digimon directly shapes what it becomes. Monzaimon is still one of my favorite Digimon because of this game. Finding out Numemon can evolve into Monzaimon in the Toy Factory was a huge deal. Helped me beat the game. Like the original Virtual Pets, Digimon World runs on a constant internal clock. Every real-world second equals 1 in-game minute, meaning a full day passes in about 24 minutes. Since your Digimon spends roughly a third of that time asleep, though, a typical day is even shorter in practice. Time only stops during menus, dialogue, and battles, which means your partner is always aging towards its next evolution, and eventually its death. That ticking clock turns every Digimon into a temporary companion. You only get so much time together, and what that Digimon becomes depends largely on how you've raised it. The branching evolution mechanics from the Virtual Pets return, but they're expanded dramatically. Your Digimon now has traditional RPG stats like HP, MP, offense, defense, speed, and brains. Weight matters, care mistakes matter, happiness and discipline matter. The number of techniques your Digimon has learned matters. Even seemingly small decisions can influence every outcome. Every evolution is determined by a hidden combination of requirements: stats, weight, care mistakes, and a set of unique bonus conditions. Meet enough of these criteria, and your Digimon will evolve into a stronger form. Miss the mark, and you might end up with one of the infamous Trashmons like Numamon or Vetamon instead. What's important isn't necessarily the exact math behind the system, it's the uncertainty. Digimon World rarely tells you why something happened. You can raise two seemingly identical Digimon and still end up with different results. One player gets Greymon, another gets Tyrannomon. Someone else accidentally discovers that their Numamon can become Monzaimon and suddenly finds themselves with one of the strongest Digimon in the game. That sense of mystery is a huge part of Digimon World's appeal. Every evolution feels like an experiment, and every player gradually develops their own theories about how the game works. Sometimes those theories are completely wrong, sometimes they're accidentally correct. Either way, the result is that players become invested in raising and understanding their Digimon. I remember getting the 3 champion forms that Agumon and Gabumon share, Centaurumon, Tyrannomon, and Monochromon, a lot as a kid, and having a hard time figuring out how to get the remaining forms on either of them, not counting Numamon. On newer save files, I've gone out of my way to avoid heavier champions until I've recruited Vegemon to the city, because I remember how annoying Mons like Tyrannomon and Waymon are to deal with if you don't have enough food resources. I do remember being able to go Centaurumon to Andromon rather consistently, but struggling with other ultimate forms. So many Kabuterimon either dying out as champions, becoming Metal Mamemon, or living long enough to become Vetamon, before I finally found a reliable guide as an adult for how to get Hercules Kabuterimon. Digimon World was the first piece of Digimon media to significantly reinterpret established evolution routes and mechanics. Even outside of the original V-Pets, though, this wasn't the franchise's first console game. That distinction goes to Digital Monster Version S for the Sega Saturn in 1998. While Version S did feature boss fights and an original storyline, told through emails and online message boards, it was essentially a direct one-to-one translation of the Digital Monster V-Pets on a TV screen. Players could raise up to 4 Digimon at once, but the core raising and evolution systems operated on the same rules as the toys. Evolution routes were unchanged, and each version still had its own separated roster. Digimon World, by contrast, combined versions 1 through 4 of the Digital Monster V-Pets into a single system, creating entirely new evolution possibilities by crisscrossing rosters that had never interacted before. Agumon can still become Greymon, Tyrannomon, or Meramon like before, but now also Birdramon, Monochromon, or Centaurumon. Biomon and Patamon, previously separated across different devices, now hatch from the same Digi-Egg, and they can now evolve into their expected adult forms, Birdramon and Angemon, neither of which was originally possible in the V-Pets. Kunemon is reimagined as a special case evolution, only obtainable in a specific area of the game and entirely outside of the normal evolution web. The game also reworks several of the Trashmon evolutions. Numamon still serves as the punishment for poor care, but Vetamon now fills a similar role at the ultimate level. Vegemon is promoted into a legitimate evolution with its own requirements, while Sukamon and Nanimon become condition-based Digimon tied to specific behaviors, such as repeatedly neglecting toilet use, or letting happiness and discipline fall too low. There are also failure or death evolutions that may be triggered after losing battles, possibly turning apparent setbacks into alternate progression paths. Metal Greymon may become Skull Greymon, or Birdramon may become Phoenixmon, to name a few examples. In some cases, this is even the only way to obtain certain Digimon. For example, Devimon is explicitly framed as a fallen Angemon. I think my favorite part about this game is all the alternate evolution paths. Like, in Factorial Town you can upgrade a Mamemon into Metal Mamemon with a decent success rate, but the first time I tried it, I was told there was an error during the process, and it gave me Giromon instead. Or having my Patamon become Angemon, die and turn into Devimon, evolve into Megadramon, and then die and become Skull Greymon. anytime I discovered something like this, it made that entire run automatically worth it. I remember crying when finding out my Digimon died, only to later realize that reincarnating is a core mechanic. It hardened me at an early age. Of course, faithfully adapting the virtual pet system also means preserving its harsher rules, including death and reincarnation. A Digimon's average lifespan is around 15 in-game days, extended by roughly 5 more if it reaches Ultimate. Each Digimon also has 3 lives, which are consumed when the player fails to revive them in battle. When a Digimon dies permanently, it is reborn as a new egg chosen by the player, but its previous life determines how much progress carries over. Death from battle, illness, or neglect resets progression entirely, but if a Digimon lives a long, healthy life and dies of old age, it passes on all of its learned techniques and retains roughly 10% of its stats upon reincarnation. When I first played this game, I always trained HP just because I was afraid of getting my Digimon killed in the later areas. I was also a fan of Agumon at the time due to Digimon Adventure. This led to me almost always getting Tyrannomon and made the game a bit harder than normal because it would eat almost all of my food stock. The best part of playing this game was me and my classmates sharing our discoveries. We would play this game for the whole weekend and then brainstorm what we found out or what our theories are. But the VPET mechanics are only one half of Digimon World. The other half is exploration, and it's important to note Digimon World is not an RPG. It has RPG elements, but at its core, it's an open-ended virtual pet simulator expanded into a full 3D space. Your Digimon will constantly communicate immediate needs, hunger, fatigue, etc., but now the player is responsible for managing those needs while also handling battles, exploration, and long-term progression. This creates a constant resource management pressure, especially early on when inventory space is limited, food is scarce, and File City lacks basic services. Progress is measured by how much of the island you've successfully stabilized through recruitment. Every Digimon you bring back contributes something tangible to the city. New shops, healing services, transport systems, improved food production, or simple quality of life upgrades that expand what the player is able to do. Exploration of File Island is therefore almost entirely non-linear. After receiving your starter Digimon and a small supply of items from NPCs in File City, you're immediately allowed to leave and begin charting your own path. The first wild Agumon you defeat unlocks an item storage bank in the city, immediately expanding your long-term resource management options. From there, the game loosely guides you through Native Forest as a safe starting point, but does not enforce anything. Exploring there yields early recruits that improve File City's meat farm, increasing the quality of the meat and allowing you to purchase extra cuts beyond your initial daily ration. And recruiting Kunemon opens a shortcut on the town's east side by clearing the bushes that previously blocked the way. Every new recruitment demonstrates how exploration and city development are feeding into each other. As players continue to follow early NPC hints, heading south towards Sela Point at specific times of day triggers the next major progression step, unlocking Tropical Jungle to the east, and recruiting Sealamon soon after grants access to the game's first proper item shop. So within roughly the first hour of play, the player has already transformed File City from a bare survival hub into a functioning base of operations. And each new region beyond continues that same loop of discovery and expansion. I also found the game to be really fun to explore. It was like, okay, one more screen, one more area to check. Just wandering around trying to find secrets and new areas to unlock. Mysteries everywhere, like seeing the mansion for the first time and wondering what lay within. After Native Forest, the game truly opens up in a way few games at the time ever did. Instead of funneling the player down a fixed path, Digimon World presents File Island as a space you gradually map out through curiosity and risk. Tropical Jungle leads toward File City's first shop upgrade and a clinic, along with access to the Ancient Dino region and some story progression, as well as the first item capacity upgrade. Or you can head west into Drill Tunnel, which opens Mount Panorama and eventually Gear Savannah, where you can recruit the vast majority of the city's shopkeeper Digimon. Push further north and the island becomes dramatically more dangerous, but never actually closed off. Progress is gated less by invisible walls than by whether you're prepared to survive what's already there. That design creates a go-anywhere mentality that defines the entire game. While certain areas do require specific conditions or recruitment triggers, very little is strictly locked at the outset. If you can survive the journey, you can go there. File Island itself was already the established setting of the original Digital Monster Virtual Pets, but Digimon World is the first time it was rendered as a place you could actually inhabit and learn. Digital Monster version S also takes place on File Island, but most of its time is spent interfacing with VPET systems or reading emails. Meanwhile, the V-Tamer manga, which began publication just a few months before this game, moves to the larger Folder continent, tied to the Pendulum VPETs the manga was in part meant to advertise. Because of this, Digimon World ends up producing what is arguably the most iconic representation of File Island, simply by letting players become familiar with it firsthand. And that familiarity can completely change the way you view other facets of the franchise. The first arc of the anime, which also takes place on File Island, gains an additional layer of recognition once you've played the game. You can essentially trace the character's journey across the island through the video game. I think the only truly drastic change the anime made to the island's layout is that Overdell Cemetery and Greylord's Mansion are now two separate locations. Even the game's central plot of Digimon mysteriously going berserk is paralleled by the anime's Black Gears plotline. This game has been with me my entire life. When I was young, I wasn't very good, but as I aged, I got better. File Island became a second home to me. Each time I'd do a little better, recruit more Digimon, get stronger evolutions, better techs, do more. Nowadays, I can get through the game no problem. It's always good to come back to it. File Island is home. I know it like the back of my hand. Taking cues from games such as Resident Evil and Final Fantasy VII, Digimon World presents 3D character models atop pre-rendered 2D backdrops, and the result is an environment that feels strangely suspended in time. Every screen is dense with detail. The digital world is an Alice in Wonderland-styled hybrid of natural landscapes and 90s computer detritus. Dot matrix displays, wall outlets, refrigerators, and vending machines embedded into forests and ruins in ways that feel deliberately out of place. Even your items are tech-themed, like chips and floppy disks. One area appears to be an overt homage to Resident Evil, a mansion with a red-carpeted foyer and extravagant dining room, puzzle-like navigation through interconnected rooms, locked doors requiring keys, and even a hidden basement laboratory housing a terrifying science experiment. And if all of that wasn't blatant enough, this is also the only area in the game where the player has to press a button to open doors, just like in classic Resident Evil. Digimon World occupies a rare space in sandbox design where the world feels vast and non-linear, but still tight. Unlike many other open-world games where space can feel incidental or empty, every screen in File Island feels intentional, something to observe, interact with, or learn from. To put it another way, File Island feels larger than it actually is. And just as you've become familiar with the island and begin to explore its northern reaches, you can recruit Birdramon to unlock fast travel between key locations. And the autopilot item allows instant return to File City from anywhere on the map, turning navigation into a breeze. As the player progresses, you start to become part of the ecosystem itself. The most satisfying thing about progression in this game is being able to actually see how much you've accomplished just in the 2 or 3 screens that make up File City. Every new NPC wandering around, every new shop, every renovated building or upgraded asset is a reminder of just how much you've done. Progress is no longer something abstract represented by EXP, levels, or stats. Progress is spatial and visible. Townsfolk even treat the player like a local celebrity. Cockatriemon builds a statue in their honor in the city square, and shopkeepers offer discounts whenever you're raising a newly hatched Digimon to congratulate you on your newborn. Each Digimon you raise follows set sleep cycles. Wild encounters will change depending on the time of day, and NPCs operate on rotating shifts that affect available items and services. The game also runs on a seasonal loop, not just a daily one. One in-game year spans 30 days, effectively functioning as a monthly cycle. Certain shops and events, like the Gear Savannah card shop and Lost and Found, are only available during the first half of the year, while tournaments in File City's Coliseum operate on fixed schedules that encourage long-term planning. Even Beetleland's annual tournament occurs only once per year on the 22nd. Layered onto this are additional structural constraints, such as area access tied to whether your Digimon is a vaccine or a virus type. But rather than creating pressure or strict failure states, these systems ultimately reinforce patience. Everything in Digimon World is cyclical. If something is missed, it eventually comes back around again. You don't necessarily have to go into Digimon World with a plan. As long as you take decent care of your Digimon and keep its stats in the triple digits, you're bound to evolve it into something halfway usable, and from there, the island is yours to explore. I used to speedrun Digimon World. It's crazy how much potential there is in the game for completely unique experiences. You can skip just about every optional fight. There's significant post-credits content including the medals. Hercules Kabuterimon is my favorite Digimon because it was one of the first ultimates I got in Digimon World. The game doesn't end with just the completion of the main story. Even after the credits roll, the player can continue indefinitely, tying up loose ends or pursuing systems they previously ignored. The final dungeon itself is gated behind roughly half of the total city completion, meaning beating the game is not synonymous with exhausting its content. In practice, Digimon World allows for a game that continues on endlessly. Even after there are no more Digimon left to recruit, the systems remain open-ended. Players can continue raising Digimon through multiple reincarnations, gradually filling out evolution charts. They can enter daily tournaments, spend time engaging in small activities like curling with Penguinmon, or travel the island learning techniques that they never encountered during their initial playthrough. The amount of content available far exceeds what is required to reach the credits, creating a structure where finishing the game is only the beginning of your engagement with it. Post-game content is largely going to revolve around medal hunting. Medals function as milestone records for significant achievements, stuff like completing the game, achieving full city prosperity, raising every Digimon, winning all tournaments, earning large amounts of money, or even surviving for 10 in-game years. Most of these goals are intentionally long-term and repetitive rather than immediately rewarding. I think the only one that's primarily skill-based is getting a perfect 10 in curling. Importantly, medals are not treated like modern achievement systems designed for constant gratification. Hell, you're not likely to get your first medal until you beat the game. These are meant to reward truly dedicated players, not to act as a dangling carrot or a participation trophy. Also, I'll just say, bits, top-notch term for money in Digimon. Like, it's bits as in gold coins, but also bits as in the unit of measurement for computer data. If there is such a thing as a perfect pun, I think this might be it. Thought I was hot shit the first time I got an ultimate. Meramon turned into Andromon and I thought I was invincible. Then I met Piximon. Battles in Digimon World are unusual in that the player is never in direct control of their Digimon. Instead, the Digimon acts autonomously while the player functions more like a coach, issuing general commands, offense, defense, distance, etc., that may or may not be followed depending on how well the Digimon has been raised. A Digimon with high speed responds more quickly to instructions, while a higher brain stat increases both command responsiveness and the number of commands available. The player can also intervene during combat by opening the menu to use items for healing or buffs, but that remains the player's only direct input on battles themselves. Each Digimon is assigned 1 to 3 combat types, such as fire, thunder, grappling, or mechanical, which determines its available techniques. New moves are learned by either observing them in battle, or by increasing the brain stat at the gym, where milestones, 250, 350, 450, etc., can unlock additional techniques. Once learned, up to 3 moves can be equipped, and once your brain stat has reached at least 500, the player can issue direct commands for specific techniques, rather than relying on their Digimon to make the right calls. Every Digimon also has access to its signature finishing move, inherited from the V-Pets. During battle, a finish gauge fills through successful actions such as landing attacks or blocking. Once full, the player can trigger a finisher attempt and build its power through an interactive input sequence using L1 and R1, somewhat echoing the original Virtual Pet's power meter. However, timing remains critical. If the opponent begins a successful attack during the windup, the finisher is interrupted and the gauge is reset entirely. Essentially, battles in Digimon World are what battles in Pokémon always claimed to be like. While Pokémon has always tried to justify its battles in lore as trainers commanding their monsters, in practice, the player is basically just playing as their Pokémon. They're just selecting moves from a literal list. The only time a monster will disobey is if the player lacks the appropriate badges. But in Digimon World, it really does feel like you're coaching a battle between 2 monsters, who may or may not act accordingly depending almost entirely on how well you've trained them. Here, you truly are training a partner. I remember stumbling into my first ultimate, Andromon, fairly early game. This was actually a setback though, because the windup for his attack took so long that he would just more or less get stagger-locked in fights that he should, on paper, own in. So, the excitement of getting an ultimate, followed by the deflating experience of watching him get repeatedly mauled, will stick with me for a while. Because evolution always operates on a timer, and because specific requirements are never clearly communicated in-game, evolution in Digimon World exists in a constant state of uncertainty. Every time an evolution begins, it creates a moment of tension. You've done your part, but the outcome is never fully under your control. All you can do is watch and hold your breath. That uncertainty is amplified by the branching nature of Digimon growth. A single evolution can redirect an entire playthrough. During my own playthrough, my Agumon evolved into Greymon, the most difficult of his standard evolution paths, and between the two of them I had built up a useful set of fire techniques. But when Greymon evolved into Metal Greymon, oops, he can't use fire techniques. Metal Greymon specializes in machine-type techniques, which are far harder to acquire early on. So, despite higher raw stats, my Metal Greymon struggled simply because his moveset lagged behind. It wasn't until I happened to learn Megaton Punch from a random Goblimon that he regained his consistency in combat. It just goes to show the sort of unpredictability that comes with a system like this. It's ridiculous just how much I cared for my Digimon. Death always made me sad. Not for a delay in progress, but the game really does make you care about your digital buddy. Especially your first, since you can go through so much with your first partner that first death from old age can really hit hard. One of the more interesting consequences of how stats, evolution, and reincarnation interact in Digimon World is that, in theory, almost any Digimon can reach maximum stats. Stat growth is not strictly tied to species in a way that permanently locks certain partners out of viability. This makes a wide range of Digimon usable throughout the entire game, whether the player is choosing based on preference or practicality. While there are still optimal choices in terms of move pools and combat efficiency, very few Digimon are completely non-viable. However, that same flexibility creates what I like to call the Final Fantasy II problem, a design situation where character growth is so open-ended that traditional balance becomes difficult to maintain. After all, how do you properly balance a game where the player can theoretically be as weak or as strong as they want at any given point? Early and mid-game regions are carefully tuned to be manageable, but because strength is constantly recalculated through training and reincarnation, difficulty can spike or collapse unpredictably depending on the state of the player's current Digimon. A well-developed partner can trivialize encounters, while a poorly timed death and rebirth can suddenly reset progress in a way that makes previously safe areas dangerous again. The difficulty balance in Digimon World is constantly fluctuating. I remember doing nothing in order to get a Numemon to get into the Monzaemon costume. I didn't use the internet, I just really liked exploring everything, and after grinding for hours in the gym, the Monzaemon died having accomplished nothing. Each time your Digimon dies and is reborn, you are effectively forced to reset your immediate goals. Whatever you were working toward gets interrupted, and you often end up spending significant time rebuilding basic stats just to return to where you were. Oftentimes, you can spend literal days on end doing nothing but training at the gym. Each gym session consumes 1 hour of in-game time, while increasing stats only in small increments, meaning even a routine recovery can take up a substantial portion of a Digimon's lifespan. There are tools that can accelerate this process, such as training-boosting foods or evolution items that force specific outcomes, but both of these come with trade-offs. Those special foods are expensive and are overridden as soon as you feed your Digimon anything else, while evolution items bypass the stat growth and lifespan benefits of natural evolution, making them efficient but kinda pointless in the long run. The game is a grind, basically, is what I'm saying. You raise a Digimon, prepare it for exploration, accomplish what you can across the island before it dies, and then inevitably return to a new egg and start over. Progress isn't a straight line, it's a repeating loop. And in my years of playing Digimon World, I've come to notice that at a structural level, this game shares an interesting parallel with another game built around cyclical repetition. A game I've come to call one of my favorite games of all time. The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is the 2000 follow-up to 1998's Ocarina of Time, and places Link in the land of Termina, which is destined to be destroyed by a falling moon in exactly 3 days. Using the Ocarina of Time, the player repeatedly resets this 3-day cycle in order to gradually seek the means to save Termina from its terrible fate. The cyclical, looping nature of Majora's Mask is its central gameplay gimmick, with the player forced to reset the clock before they've exhausted the 72-hour period, or else they're faced with the destruction of Termina and a game over. I'll try to keep things brief, since I'm going to do a dedicated Majora's Mask video in the future, but I'll just say that the thing that sticks out about Majora's Mask is the impermanence of a lot of your actions. While key items and masks are kept whenever you reset the clock, your consumables are depleted, any money you didn't deposit in the bank will be gone, NPCs will all forget they ever met you, and any quest and story progress will be completely reset. So essentially, your goal during each 3-day cycle is to make just enough progress to achieve the next key item or the means to enter the next important area. All the story events leading up to the next dungeon may have been reset, but since you have now acquired the means to enter that dungeon, there's no need to do all that over again. You've freed up an entire 3-day cycle just to clearing the dungeon. And in Digimon World, a similar structure emerges through the life cycle of each Digimon. A partner can only live for a limited number of in-game days, after which it dies and is reborn. While certain elements may carry over if you play your cards right, each reincarnation still forces the player to rebuild momentum and re-establish their position on File Island. Both games even use limited save systems. Majora's Mask essentially forces you to play each 3-day cycle in a single sitting. You can create temporary one-time save files at the game's owl statues, but permanent saves can only be performed when you reset the clock. Similarly, Digimon World only has one manual save point, located in Gigimon's house in File City. Otherwise, the game only allows you to save whenever you put your Digimon to bed for the night. I forgot to work this into the script, but I wanted to point out that both of these games also revolve around a centralized hub city that the player repeatedly returns to, and also, both games place a lot of focus on the passage of time and schedule management, and require the player to memorize NPC routines in order to make progress. It's actually kind of remarkable how much these two games have in common structurally. Importantly, Digimon World predates Majora's Mask by roughly a year and a half. For the record, I do believe Majora's Mask is the better game between the two, by a lot, but it's interesting to note the similarities between them regardless. It highlights that Digimon World was already experimenting with cyclical progression systems that were unusual for the time. In both of these games, repetition becomes the primary form of learning. Progress is not defined by moving forward, but by gradually understanding how to make each return more efficient than the last. I remember wasting tens of hours exploring this game and still don't know what I'm supposed to do to beat it. However, Digimon World can, infamously, also be incredibly hostile to newcomers. The game clearly expects you to go in with some prior familiarity with the Digimon V-Pets, which many players outside Japan wouldn't have, and in 1999, this kind of open-ended opaque design wasn't nearly as commonplace in games as it is today. Digimon World expects the player to mess up, a lot. But that expectation can easily become discouraging before the systems have a chance to click into place. So this creates a weird contradiction. On one hand, Digimon World rewards planning, optimization, and long-term understanding of its mechanics, but on the other hand, it also begs the player to put down the walkthroughs and just explore. Evolution requirements can be extremely specific to the point where a guide feels necessary if you want consistent results, and yet the game simultaneously pushes players to abandon that mindset and simply experiment, to just accept that all that uncertainty is just part of the game. During my own playthrough this time, I was able to complete the main objectives, as in maximum city prosperity, defeating the final boss, and clearing the post-game dungeon in exactly 3 in-game years and about 4 Digimon life cycles, roughly 25 to 30 hours in total. However, I was also operating on a lot of prior knowledge with this game. I already understood the systems well enough to plan my routes, manage my evolution outcomes, and avoid common player pitfalls. I wasn't playing perfectly, but I was playing informed. A first-time player is likely to spend significantly longer than that just learning how those systems interact, let alone optimizing them. Because of that, it's easy to see how Digimon World could benefit from clearer communication or quality of life features, things like in-game maps or more transparent evolution conditions. At the same time, those very gaps in design are part of what defines this experience. A game that doesn't guide you but instead forces you to build understanding through repeated failure. Digimon World isn't universally approachable. It asks a lot from the player, but it also offers something distinctive in return if you're willing to meet it on its own terms. Sometimes when we had a free day at school, someone would bring a PlayStation. We would bring our memory cards and have a mini tournament on who had the strongest Digimon so far. For most of my grade school life, this was our go-to game. Digimon World was one of the few PS1 games to implement functional multiplayer. And by that I mean it isn't just one game allowing 2 controllers. I mean this is a game that allows both players to utilize their own personal save files in competition. In battle mode, the game reads data directly from both memory cards, allowing players to import their own trained Digimon into competitive matches. Once the player completes the main game, they're even given access to a free Machinedramon for multiplayer use. Battles can be structured as 1v1, 3v3, or 5v5 encounters, using the same core combat system as a single-player mode, but without item usage. The result is a surprisingly flexible competitive framework. This gives Digimon World a very identifiable competitive metagame, and also a clear distinct edge over its predecessor, Digital Monster version S. The Saturn game lacked any multiplayer whatsoever, a rather glaring omission given that the central inspiration for Digimon in the first place was having virtual pets that could fight one another. In fact, Digimon World rendered much of version S obsolete in general. The main appeal of version S was really just seeing the traditional Digital Monster interface fleshed out on an actual TV. And while those arcade-quality sprite-work graphics still have appeal, everything version S did, Digimon World did better. Version S's controls, interface, and music are all dated, even by 1999 standards. The story is thin, lasting just around 5 hours, and featuring no actual dialogue outside of boss fights. The central gameplay is just a one-to-one conversion of the already somewhat primitive V-Pets, rather than the massive restructuring and expansion of Digimon World. Apart from version S's relative obscurity, thanks to being a Japan-only release on a third-place console, there's a reason Digimon World is largely considered to be the first Digimon game, because it was the first one to be designed primarily as a video game, rather than a simple extension of the existing toy line. The fact that Piximon was so broken in this game was shocking and made me learn never to underestimate the small guy. That Greymon jump scare from Gigimon's house scarred me. I stopped visiting him after that. I hope the old guy's doing well. Digimon World reuses the Digimon from versions 1 through 4 of the V-Pets, as well as a couple from the first Pendulum, which was released while Digimon World was in production. There are also some original monsters thrown in for good measure. Interestingly, despite releasing after version 5, and even featuring a few Pendulum monsters, no version 5 monsters appear in Digimon World, aside from X-Tyrannomon making a cameo as a building in Toy Town. Digimon World and its new Digimon were being showcased in Japanese print ads around the time of V-Tamer's debut in late 1998. By then, Bandai had been prepping the various branches of the franchise, anime, manga, card game, etc., for about 9 months, and to promote the video game, special memory cards containing a unique Metal Edamon evolution item were distributed. Interestingly, evolution items for Gigadramon and Panjamon also exist in the game, and are completely functional. Those Digimon act as recolors for Megadramon and Leomon respectively. Presumably, Bandai had plans to reveal them as special event giveaways as well, but for whatever reason this never came to fruition. Where Garurumon was also planned at one point and had both his 2D sprite and evolution item programmed in, but since his 3D model was never finished, the game will freeze if the player attempts to use it. Like much of early Digimon, behind-the-scenes info on Digimon World is scarce, but it's worth noting that this was the last major piece of Digimon media to be released before the debut of the TV show, predating the anime's first episode by about 2 months. As such, this game serves as something of an end of an era for the franchise, since the runaway success of the anime would essentially turn that into the pillar around which the rest of the franchise revolved. For those outside of Japan, though, Digimon World released at the tail end of the anime's first season in 2000, and so it sort of had the reverse effect for us. It gave us a window into a prior iteration of the franchise that many of us frankly never even knew existed. For those of us who were only familiar with the anime, some of the evolutions and story elements in Digimon World threw us for a loop. Tentomon is only in the game as an NPC, and Palmon evolves into Kabuterimon instead of Togemon. In fact, Togemon isn't in the game whatsoever, nor is Gomamon despite him still appearing on the game's European cover art. The lack of Mega Level was a big sticking point for a lot of us too, since the anime had taught us to take the Stage 6 evolution for granted. Metal Greymon in this game is based on his original Blue Virus incarnation, as opposed to the revised Orange Vaccine variant from the TV show. Ogremon and Leomon fulfill similar roles to their TV counterparts, acting as troublemakers and protectors respectively. Waymon acts as a friendly living form of transport, and Andromon is tasked with maintaining Factorial Town, all just like in the anime. But then we have a Myotismon show up who is entirely good-natured, despite him being one of the anime's most nefarious villains. Certain Digimon show up with earlier unfinished designs, such as Vegemon being green for some reason, Gardramon having a different color scheme, and Cherrymon's design being completely different from what we're used to. The Golemon in this game are also wire frames, as a golem of digital data would probably be made from unfinished assets rather than from mud. That's kinda clever. Whereas the Golemon that's shown up in Digimon media since has been a much more literal interpretation of that concept. The game also introduced a plethora of new Digimon that are little more than recolors of existing ones, but it did so in a way that served a functional purpose. Essentially, all these recolors act as an indicator to the player of whether a Digimon is involved in a major questline or whether it's just random battle fodder. If it's one of the originals, safe to bet it'll be important for progression. Otherwise, it can be avoided. Some of these recolored Digimon do feature subtle design differences as well, such as Shima Unimon lacking wings, but what's important is that players are able to tell just from the difference in color which Digimon are important to interact with. A few Digimon show up that are complete originals too, such as Flare Lizamon, complete with an accompanying VPET sprite just for the game's flat status condition. This game was also one of the last Digimon projects to use the virtual pets as the primary source material, since after the success of the anime, Bandai would pivot the franchise's focus to the TV show and card game instead. Digimon World was also the earliest appearance of monsters like Gigimon, Clockmon, Warumanzaimon, and Megaseedramon. And of course, there's the debut of Machinedramon, who acts as the game's final boss, accompanied by an absolutely kick-ass battle track. Machinedramon to this day is one of my favorite final boss fights from any game. It helps that his theme is one of the best tracks in the game, which is saying a lot because the soundtrack is pretty incredible in general. Yet another reason the infamous Giromon jukebox bug that crashes the game in the US version is such a bummer. The soundtrack of Digimon World is, broadly speaking, kind of exceptional. There aren't many other PlayStation-era soundtracks that sound like this, and even after hundreds of hours of exposure, it rarely becomes boring. Each area has distinct day and night variations, and combat is layered with multiple themes depending on encounter intensity, from routine wild battles to high-stakes boss fights. The only real structural flaw is that the music resets on every screen transition, interrupting tracks that often feel like they were meant to breathe. And yes, it's true, Giromon's in-game music player crashes the game entirely in the US version and can even corrupt save data. These sorts of bugs, in and of themselves, are something to talk about here. So many bugs. I remember walking off a cliff and out into the air in one area, and thinking it was because I had a Birdramon, though it was just a map bug. You could also just sometimes walk into a completely black screen where everything was invisible except your Digimon's speech bubbles. Digimon World is notoriously buggy, and the English localization in particular introduces a wide range of additional issues, some of which are severe enough to affect progression. This is, without exaggeration, one of the most malignant English translation jobs in the history of video games. While many of these glitches are relatively minor, like text overflow, missing assets, or visual artifacts, they accumulate into a general sense that this game is constantly operating at the edge of breakdown. Again, a lot of these are purely visual, such as missing tiles in File City or the inability to properly overwrite text on the load screen, which can produce garbled names like Biomonanon. Others are far more disruptive, including menus that fail to display options correctly, particularly in the File City arena where tournament entries may appear completely invisible unless you manually select them. Getting stuck by Mojamon. Apparently, while well known now, for a kid with no internet access, doing repeated trades with Mojamon causes his model to slowly move toward your character, eventually causing it to move on top of your character and leaving you stuck, leading to a reset, losing hours of progress. More serious issues can directly impede movement and progression. The well-known Mojamon trading exploit, for example, which allows the player to trade certain items for a 300% profit, can cause character models to overlap until the player becomes physically trapped, requiring either foresight through an autopilot item or just a full reset. While often discussed online now, it can function as a genuine soft lock for unaware players. In more extreme cases, instability becomes systemic. Overloaded battle scenarios, such as heavy use of area-wide attacks like All Range Beam, can cause rendering failures that garble up all the graphics, or leave both the player and the Digimon invisible. And in those instances, even items like Autopilot can't bail you out, sometimes relocating the player into invalid map positions with no means of movement, forcing a reset and a loss of progress. There are also deeper bugs tied to core mechanics. One hunger-related underflow glitch can trigger when sleep and UI states overlap incorrectly, causing the game to treat a Digimon as though it is permanently full. This leads to unintended weight loss, which complicates evolution planning, and because the effect is not immediately obvious, it can persist long enough to undo significant progress before the player even realizes what's happened. The PAL bug is a thing that pretty much everyone that had that version encountered, and many people think that the game is not finishable without Ogremon. You are able to finish the game without being able to get into Ogre Fortress, but it's way harder, since there are so freakishly many Digimon attached to that questline. No Ogremon means no Shellmon questline, and no Waymon, so no Factorial Town questline. And since there are so many ultimates associated with these questlines, you lose out on so many points. Perhaps most notoriously, in the game's PAL release, a critical bug prevents the Agumon guard outside Ogre Fortress from triggering properly, permanently blocking access to large portions of the Ogremon questline. Since this questline connects to multiple key recruitment chains, including Shellmon, Waymon, and the entirety of Factorial Town, its disruption has cascading effects on city progression and late-game access. While the game remains technically beatable, the loss of these pathways means getting to the final boss is now significantly more difficult. I guess not all the bugs are harmful, though. The Digitamamon restaurant exploit allows players to repeatedly purchase stat-boosting meals even if their Digimon is no longer hungry, meaning a player with enough money can reach max stats in a matter of a few minutes. However, its usefulness is naturally limited by the fact that Digitamamon is only available after you've beaten the game, meaning this primarily serves as a trick for players looking to complete their medal collection. The PS1 booklet advice for getting Greymon was to, and I quote, live a normal life. I spent hours as a kid not letting my starter Agumons train or fight because as a kid that didn't seem like a normal life. It took me 3 Numamon to clock that something wasn't quite right. And this isn't even getting into the quality of the game's translation itself, which is not great. The instruction manual has a lot of strange and unclear phrasing, and characters in-game all speak as though English is their second language. Dialogue regularly reads as though it's been translated without full context, leading to a lot of conversations that flat out don't make sense. You'll also occasionally get weird misspellings like the Frig key instead of the Fridge key, or English mistranslations like Goburimon for Goblimon, the latter of which would unfortunately be carried over into later Digimon localizations. They accidentally swapped the names of Metal Greymon and Hercules Kabuterimon's finishing moves, and this Metal Mamemon apparently has an identity crisis because he is consistently called Metal Greymon. This game also features CG cutscenes for its opening and ending, complete with voice acting, and visually they're fairly impressive for their time, but the English version was clearly working on a shoestring budget because every character in these cutscenes, the main character, his mother, and his 3 friends, are all voiced by Mona Marshall, the same actress who played Izzy in the anime's English dub.
Wow! Metal Greymon and Metal Mamemon! Oh, lost again! Oh, you're here!
Now, don't get me wrong, Mona Marshall is a talented veteran voice actor, but I've never really considered her to have a particularly wide range, and even as a kid, I could tell that these characters were all the same actor. And they didn't even bother to dub any of the in-game sound bites, since all of those voice lines are still in Japanese. Not that you can necessarily tell beneath the 50 levels of compression they've evidently been run through. I had this game, never understood how to progress in it, and so gave it up pretty quickly. Never tried picking it back up, and never understood everyone's love for this particular game. I don't hate it, I just never got it. Critical reception to Digimon World at release was mixed at best. In Western markets especially, the game was frequently criticized for its harsh, tinny sound effects and its plethora of bugs, and its battle system was seen as unorthodox and unsatisfying. Many reviewers also struggled to understand or categorize it. Many were quick to turn their nose up at Digimon World, dismissing it as a shallow Pokémon imitator, but then they would simultaneously decry the game for diverging too far from Pokémon's structure. That contradiction of being too much like Pokémon and not enough like Pokémon became a recurring feature of this game's reception. Rather than being evaluated on its own mechanical terms, Digimon World was often judged against expectations that it was never designed to meet. At the same time, even the most critical reviews tended to acknowledge that this game was really pretty. For a PlayStation title released only weeks before Final Fantasy VIII, its use of pre-rendered environments, dense environmental detail, and relatively high polygon counts were considered impressive, even if the surrounding systems were seen as confusing or unpolished. Overall, though, in the Western markets, Digimon World is largely remembered as a bizarre, poorly translated pile of bugs and playground rumors. Outside of the West, reception was more measured. Famitsu awarded the game a 23 out of 40, a modest but not entirely dismissive score, and Japanese audiences were generally more receptive to the game's structure. Among Japanese fans, Digimon World is often remembered as one of the pioneers of pet-raising simulators, and is considered to be one of the genre's earliest masterpieces. I will say though, I vastly prefer the US cover art for this game. The Japanese art is great, but it's also way too busy. The US cover is probably one of the only times where let's just take a screen cap from the intro and slap the game's logo on it actually really fucking works. As a kid, I hated Digimon World, and it stayed Numemon Simulator in my mind for decades, even though I tried my best. I think last year I finally gave it a shot as an adult game developer and loved it. Basically, the Digivolution criteria is way too hidden and it can ruin the game, but when you know your way around it, it's amazing. Bandai spent decades trying to make it less frustrating, but still mysterious, and they're close to getting it right with Next Order, but not quite. This is a video I've been waiting to make for a long time, pretty much since I started making videos. Not necessarily because I expected it to perform well or resonate broadly, but because Digimon World is one of those games that has stayed in my head for years in a way that most games don't. Not to get my own hopes up, but in a way, I sort of expected that eventually Digimon would become a cornerstone of my channel, if you couldn't tell by my choice of profile pic. As a guy in his 30s with a full-time job, I don't have a lot of free time for hobbies anymore, but video games, and Digimon specifically, are among the few exceptions that have managed to persist into my adult life. Having said that then, you might be shocked to now hear me say, most Digimon games aren't actually very good. In fact, a lot of them have been pretty bad. Now, before y'all head to the comments, let me say this. That has definitely started to turn around over the last decade or so. Particularly since titles like Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth, the reputation for quality in Digimon games has been on a slow but steady incline. But for the first, say, 20 or so years of this franchise's life, these games could get pretty rough. Most of them didn't even receive English releases, for one thing, but even the ones that did could be of massively varying quality. This was partly due to a lot of Digimon games being released for the Japan-only WonderSwan, but I think it may also have something to do with the way the Digimon games, until Cyber Sleuth, never really stuck to one particular style. And after Digimon World 1, I can see why. An open-world adventure game with virtual pet mechanics and extensive layered evolution trees is a type of game design that takes a lot of time, planning, and money to create. It's just a lot of work when compared to more traditional template-driven genres, such as dungeon crawlers, hack and slashes, or turn-based RPGs. All of which are genres the Digimon games would also try. Even the mainline Digimon World games switched genres with every entry, which, yes, can help in pulling in a wide audience by extending several branches at once, but it was also very frustrating for fans to get a Digimon game with a lot of promise, only for a lot of those interesting ideas to be completely abandoned by the very next game. So what we end up with is a bunch of games filled with interesting ideas that rarely get refined across multiple iterations. Cyber Sleuth worked in part because it was built on a longer internal lineage of Digimon story games dating all the way back to the DS, so that formula had time to evolve into something more coherent over time. It demonstrates what this franchise is capable of when ideas are actually allowed to accumulate instead of just being reset every game. And that's why Digimon World is so difficult for me to recommend without tacking on a bunch of asterisks. This is not a smooth or accessible game. There is a lot to love in Digimon World, if you're okay with obtuse mechanics, a crappy translation, blatant bugs, and a lack of any direction or instruction. This game doesn't hold your hand, at all. It barely even tells you what you're supposed to be doing, or how to properly raise your Digimon. You're kinda just expected to figure it all out on your own, often through failure and repetition. A VPET simulator combined with an open-world Zelda game combined with a JRPG isn't something you see every day, but that also means that this game was very much figuring things out as it went. This is it. The best game I have ever played. The animations are all just so adorable. The way Biyomon happily snuggles you and then trots away. The way Patamon flails on the ground when he's mad. Bakemon's hiccup laugh. Every single Digimon feels unique with its own personality, and I just love them all. Even Numemon is cute in a I gotta get to Toy Town as soon as possible kind of way. Those little animations that personify your partner are the things that are missing in future installments of the Digimon World series. They might have better core mechanics, but who cares? I want to see Tyrannomon struggle to chew on food for the 15th time today. I want to see Skull Greymon's creepy crawl. I like Sukamon accidentally dropping his jaw every now and again and having to readjust. I think the thing I liked the most about this game is that it gave me the tools to actively care for my pet in a way no other game has. I mean, maybe Nintendogs or the Chow Garden? There just isn't a game like it on the market right now. In a sense, the identity crisis at the heart of the Digimon franchise is exactly what makes this particular game so resonant. Every player seems to come away with a different perspective of Digimon World, shaped entirely by the Digimon they raised, the mistakes they made, and the systems they accidentally discovered. Even now, it still feels like a game defined by personal experience. In preparation for this video, I took to various social media sites, such as YouTube and Reddit, to ask my fellow Digimon fans for their own stories and experiences about this game. And those are the anecdotes you've been hearing throughout this video. Digimon World is like that every copy of the game is personalized meme, but like, actually, this time. That's what I wanted to showcase by including all these bits of community commentary. No two playthroughs are ever alike, since every moment is defined by a mountain of tiny variables and player decisions that can drastically alter every last second of gameplay. At the same time, though, nothing in this game feels like padding. Every screen has purpose, every NPC has something valuable to contribute, every questline contributes to growing your city. The game's spiritual successors, Redigitize and Next Order, have refined many of its ideas. They added more clarity and quality of life improvements, including the ability to flat-out disable evolutions that you've already achieved. In many ways, they are objectively better designed games, but they also inevitably smooth out some of the friction and mystery that made the original so memorable. Part of what Digimon World preserves, intentionally or not, is the feeling of not really understanding it while still being compelled to keep going. And that is probably the most important thing it leaves behind. Not just as a game, but as a design artifact from a very specific moment in the franchise's history. Even its developers moved on, some into other roles within Bandai, some into entirely different companies. And while later entries tried to revisit this game's ideas, they always did so from a different creative environment, one that could never quite replicate the conditions that produced the original. I am 34 years old, and Digimon World for the PS1 is the game of my childhood, and of the PS1 era itself. The atmosphere, the art style, the mystery surrounding how all the mechanics worked, and the sheer magic of the world still stay with me to this day. Digimon World is, in the end, a game that could only exist once. Not because its ideas are impossible to repeat, but because the combination of ambition, limitation, and uncertainty that produced it is no longer around in the same form. The thing about Digimon as a franchise is that even though it can fall back on a lot of tried and true anime tropes, it all somehow never feels generic. And Digimon World especially feels like nothing you've ever seen. The impact it's had on the franchise is immeasurable. Unlike version S, which is little more than a curiosity now, Digimon World is a cornerstone of this franchise that I believe every Digimon fan should play. And even now, decades later, people are still coming back to it. Not because it's clean or modern or convenient, but because it still feels alive in a way that's difficult to really explain. Digimon World is always competing for the top spot as my favorite game of all time. I love how the game didn't hold our hands and we had to figure out the mechanics ourselves through countless hours of training. Me and my best friend would always hop on the game after school to continue progressing the story any way we could, by training, fighting new Digimon, and discovering new areas. Till this day, no other game I have ever played has felt as mysterious and rewarding. Flaws and all, Digimon World is still a PS1 masterpiece in my eyes. That stupid shop minigame can go to hell, though. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. YouTube has demonetized my entire channel, so if you'd like to support me, please consider joining my Patreon. The link is in the description. See you in the next video, and you guys just keep doing what you're doing, whatever that is. Yep, we'll see you.